cables will fall off. Okay. Are you going to be speaking at the beginning of the meeting, or are you one of those people that? I'm glad we about that too. Okay. So Jeff, yeah, I'm gonna the update. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. No lights not on now? Thank you. Thank you. I thought I put them all on. Let me check. Sorry about that. I'm gonna route it all the way. That's what it should be. Ours is 6229. 46. Yeah, exactly. Should be 27, should be 27. It's the actual using, so they have a different number. The actual solar heating is that. They have a solar number. It's 7. Ultra select. Ultra select. Yep. It's all ultra select.
Okay. don't know what these are for. Hi. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the March 12th meeting of the Planning Board. And this is also a joint meeting with the Cambridge Redevelopment Authority, as we will be continuing design review with regard to 325 Main Street. Do you need to open your meeting?
I do. Oh, this is the one I talked into. Good evening. My name is Margaret Drury, and I am the vice chair. Our chair is absent this evening, but joining me are Treasurer Christopher Bator, Assistant Treasurer Conrad Crawford, Assistant Secretary Barry Zevin, and our wonderful staff, Executive Director Tom Evans, Alex Levering, Project Manager, and Ellen Shore, Office Director, and tonight we have with us Chuck Redmond, Consultant Architect.
Okay, before we start the hearing, the joint meeting, we have a couple matters of normal planning board business to attend to. So first we'll have a usual update from the Community Development Department. Khalil, would you please make that?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. Through the chair, just quick updates from the City Council side. Last week, the Housing Committee had a public hearing regarding the affordable housing overlay, and that was a very well attended public hearing. And March 20th, the Housing Committee will continue its public hearing from last week on, again, regarding the Affordable Housing Overlay District. April 3rd, we have the Ordinance Committee. They will have a public hearing on the accessory apartments, and that's April 2nd. April 3rd, the Ordinance Committee will have a public hearing on the Cambridge side proposed petition for a PUD 8. On the Planning Board side, just the upcoming meetings, next week, March 19, we have a public hearing again on Cambridge side PUD 8, and that's a zoning petition proposal. It will be coming before you. Again, that's next week, March 19th. And then March 26th, we will have public hearings on the accessory apartments. Again, that's a zoning petition that it's being continued. For tonight, we have under general business, we have 325 Main Street, and that's a design review continued. And then we have a BZA case for you, and that's on 43 Brookford Street. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have any transcripts to adopt? Swati?
Yes, we have one for
December
December 4th.
4th, and that's been reviewed and certified.
Yes.
Could I have a motion to adopt the December 4th transcript?
So moved.
Yes. And all in favor? So that has been adopted. I want to remind board members that the transcript for the February 5th Town Gown meeting was distributed to you all, inasmuch as that's the first transcript we've received from our new stenographer. The staff has asked that everybody review it with regard to their own comments to make sure that they're accurately reported, and that any comments you have, please give to Swati or to Jeff. Okay, and now we will continue with the design review, a joint meeting with the CRA and the design review of the building at 325 Main Street. I will introduce the board members. I'm Ted Cohen. I am vice chair. I was not at the last session of the design review, so I may need some updating. And with me is Tom Sinevich and Lou Bakshi and Hugh Russell and it's still jet lagged. I'm sorry. And so, Jeff, maybe if you could just give us a brief rundown of exactly where we are and what's going to proceed this evening.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. This, I think, is a little quiet. This new microphone system has got me a little thrown. So this is case number 315. It's part of the infill development concept plan, which is it's a PUD-like development in the MXD zoning district that includes 2 new commercial buildings and 2 new residential buildings. It went through an amendment process during the latter part of last year, a major amendment which relocated one of the commercial buildings from the previously approved location on Binney Street to Main Street. So that change in the site and the overall sort of height and massing and orientation, other aspects of the building itself were approved as part of that amendment. As with PUD projects, this concept plan is subject to further design review by the planning board, as well as, and that's a process that for this development has been undertaken jointly between the CRA, which has its own approval authority and jurisdiction, and the planning board, which has a design review approval, as it does for PUDs. So this is design review, which means that the special permit's been granted, and the procedure is for the planning board to approve a schematic design, which would be subject to continuing review by staff as it goes through the design development and continue to be monitored through the construction process, as well as would continue to be subject to oversight by the CRA. So 2 weeks ago, the planning board had a design presentation on the building as it was approved through the major amendment process. There were a number of questions that came up from planning board members and from CRA board members, and a number of issues that were identified. Staff provided some materials identifying some issues that remain to be explored. They ranged from sort of some slightly broader conceptual issues about the approaches taken to different aspects of the building, and then they range down to the more kind of fine-grained types of design issues that are typically reviewed by staff through the continuing review process. So at the end of that meeting, it was continued. The design review was continued to give an opportunity to the proponents to address some of the questions that were brought up. And that's where we are today. So this is a continuation of the design review, and the action is still for the planning board to approve a design at the schematic level. And I don't know if Tom wants to fill in with the CRA's role and action.
Thank you, Jeff. Tom Evans, for the record. The CRA has a separate process that we've run with board member participation in a design review subcommittee, and for this process, we've had planning board members participate in that. The other element of difference in our process is we kind of have an additional check-in along the way towards building permit as we do a staff-level DD review, design development review, that gives us a chance to make sure things are going in the right direction. And when we reviewed 145 Broadway with staff, we had CDD staff also brought into that process as well. So we have a little bit more of an iterative design review process from schematic to construction documents through our development agreement. So just that's another level of involvement that we can dive into some of those details as the design progresses.
Okay. Does the proponent have a further presentation to make this evening? Well, wouldn't you proceed?
Okay. Okay, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. So I'm Melissa Schrock. I'm a Vice President of Development at Boston Properties. I was here with you 2 weeks ago. Thank you for that. I know it was a long evening, a late evening. There was a lot of great conversation. I think Jeff and Tom mentioned, we were focused on a handful of issues that the boards jointly, I think, felt needed some ongoing work. We then, within, I think, 36 hours, had a follow-up call with the staff after that meeting. Jeff had given a really good summary at the end of that meeting of those handful of issues. We then had a follow-up call with both the city and CRA staffs to confirm, what we had heard and what they had heard. We've spent the last 2 weeks working very hard on those issues. You'll see them in this presentation here tonight. I think one of the things to understand and for everyone to recognize is that I think Hugh had pointed out the last meeting, some of this is going to, we've made a lot of improvements, a lot of refinements over the last 2 weeks, but some of these are going to be, the object of ongoing design review at the staff level. So hopefully you'll feel that we've addressed them adequately enough for the board's hearing here tonight. I wanted to just briefly touch on what those were through the agenda. So largely we were very focused on what is that experience as you go from Main Street up to the garden. So the public stair from Main Street up to the terrace, and then the public stair from the terrace up to the garden, along with the facade that's adjacent to that second stair. You'll see some additional renderings and design and detailing on that tonight. Then there was a lot of conversation on how to make that two-story retail space really read as retail, and especially how that second level should read as part of the retail and not necessarily part of the commercial space above. There was some conversation about the entrance area where the new building, 3CC, interfaces with 5CC and how that, those knuckles kind of interconnect in the 5CC existing building to remain is very complicated. So how we knit into it is really important and frankly one of the biggest challenges of the project. Related more to the retail as well were questions about where the entrance is and what's the signage going to be. Obviously, we don't have retail tenants yet, so there's still a lot of discovery that's going to happen there, but we're going to get into a little bit more detail about what our vision is for that. One of the things I hope you'll be very pleased with tonight is some additional facade refinement. The building hasn't changed, but there were some conversations about maybe a little bit more texture, a little bit more differentiation on the facade, so we've addressed that. All of those kind of fall into Tony and Picard Chilton's buckets, so we thought after we get through that, we would pause for discussion and questions from the board. We then have a couple of other items that were raised that can be addressed by us and separate consultants. Bike parking and access that we can talk about. And in addition, there were questions raised about the energy performance, the LEED sustainability resiliency program of the project. So we're joined by Samir Amida, who is our energy modeling consultant, as well as Stuart Mitchell. Sorry, I'm turning away. Stuart Mitchell from Vidaris, who is our envelope consultant. They're going to be able to address some of that with a few slides that we have at the very, very end. And then if there are further questions, we've also brought our mechanical engineer, Sue O'Neill, and our sustainability consultant, Allison Zuckman, are here as well to answer questions on that. So I'm going to turn over to Tony, but I did want to just run really quickly through this very next slide. There was a question that was raised about some of the commitments that we were making or the statements that I made in the last meeting about some of these things that are being done as part of the project, and they said, could you please write them down and make them very, very clear? So I just wanted to be clear about that. The level 4 terrace, which overlooks the entrance area, is being delivered as part of the base building. So that will definitely be a terrace. Adjacent to that, where there are tenant optional terraces, that's indicated in the book, when and if the tenant elects to make those into occupiable terraces, the design of those hand railings and doors and everything that are going to lead in and out of those terraces are going to be consistent with the overall design of the building. It's not just that the tenant gets to go out and, you know, slap up like some kind of crazy handrail. They're going to be consistent with the overall facade design. In addition, there was questions from the CRA about making sure that we coordinate some kind of event policy with them. We're happy to enter into that discussion. And we are committed to delivering 2 entrances on the Main Street side, as well as 2 entrances on the Kendall Plaza side into that ground floor retail to the best of our ability, not knowing what the tenants are today. So with that, I'm going to just turn it over to Tony.
Is this one working? Great. Great to see you again, even though it's only been 2 weeks since we saw each other last. They've been busy 2 weeks for us. As Melissa mentioned, most of our work has been in trying to develop more thoughtful, more thorough, more accurate details as they relate to the base of the building, so that when we came here today, we could have a more thorough discussion about the stairs, the storefront, the enclosure, the entrance to the building, the nature of the planters, handrails, etc. And I think I've mentioned this in previous meetings, but I think it's worth mentioning. One of the interesting things about this project is we as a team, along with Boston Properties and with the contractor, made one important decision early on in this project, and that was to work with some curtain wall contractors early on, so that as we were showing you details and as we were developing details as it relates to the enclosure, we could do that with the kind of full confidence that the details that we show you are actually buildable, versus creating a whole set of drawings, going out to bid, getting feedback from the curtain wall contractors saying, well, that detail doesn't work, this detail doesn't work, the way you drew this was, you know, we can't keep the water out, or we can't build a unit that size. And the reason I mention that is I think it's important that you know that as part of the work we've done in these 2 weeks, you know, whether it's related to the storefront, whether it's related to the connection between the buildings, we've done that by also working with the curtain wall guys to make sure that it's buildable and reasonable from a construction standpoint. And I like having that extra sense of faith and knowledge relative to the enclosure, because it eliminates some of the uncertainty that might come as a result of the bidding process or the shop drawings. So I also took the liberty of trying to collect the comments that both staff members gave us by way of a download, and try to organize them in a sort of a thoughtful sequence. And so the slides that we have today, we're going to sort of start here with the social stair, work our way up, talk about the cascading stair, then we're going to talk about the storefront and the entrance. And the slides have I have a kind of a clear sequence for each subject matter. I'll start with an image that has just a sense of what we're trying to achieve, but from a kind of a visual sense. Then we've created some new renderings for each one of these that show you the condition in context. And then what we've done is taken the piece and just isolated so you can see it as a kind of a standalone piece as well, almost as if you were looking at a DD drawing or an SD drawing. So I think the other thing that I want to mention is I want to follow up on a concept that I think Barry caught on to last time and did a very good job of kind of delineating. And that concept is, in our minds, there's a sort of a plinth to the building that maps onto the second level. And we think of that as kind of anchored to the earth. So a lot of the detailing related to that you'll see is a little bit heavier. It's stone and terracotta. Once you spring from that level and go upward, the building gets lighter. In our minds, the stair gets lighter because it's, in some ways, structurally it's changing. It's no longer anchored to the earth. It becomes conceptually like a beam. So it has to sort of span between terrace and roof garden. So it gets, by nature, a little bit lighter and a bit more transparent. And we'd like the facade of the second level to kind of follow that logic. So there will be a natural break here between those two, but we've done some work to try to make them still feel like they're both retail and connected. But I'd like you to kind of keep in mind that the building is set up with that concept of anchoring to the earth from the terrace down and then progressively getting lighter as it goes up. So let's look at just the plan of the social stair, which you see here. You've asked us to kind of look at this gap. And so the dotted line is the old condition. And you can see how we've expanded the dimension in each side. And we've really tightened up the elevator on this side to make that gap as wide as we think is possible. And part of the dialogue there, if you remember from last time, is we're trying to balance between the width of the stair so that it feels open and gracious, as well as the width of the opening between the elevator and the storefront. Go ahead to the next one, Brian. So the first slide, as I mentioned, is always sort of a precedent image. And our view for this social stair, as I mentioned, is it's made of stone. It feels like it has some solidity. It's anchored to the earth. It does a combination of creating steps that one can walk down, but also steps that allow one to, I always feel like I have my back to you, Barry, I'm sorry. Also areas where people can pause and sit and feel like they're part of the urban fabric. They can look out onto the street. And we're interested in creating a stair that kind of weaves the texture of the second story terrace. Maybe it plays a little bit with either two values of granite or playing with the finish of the granite. So some of it might be honed, some of it might be water jet or thermal. And then, of course, wanting to have that stair have a nice, graceful cadence. So it sort of opens up, invites you to the second story terrace, but also feels like it's making a gracious impression on the street, but doesn't take up so much space that the head house feels crowded. Go ahead, Brian. So that's a kind of a new image that shows you that stair. On the right-hand side of the image is the elevator that will bring you from the lower level of the tracks up to the head house itself and then up to the upper portion. Here's the gap that's gotten a little bit larger. And then you see the stair sort of stepping down, steps on one side, seats on the other, planters at the top that allow the kind of planting to kind of cascade down, and then stone at the base, concrete pavers as the stair meets the base, and then the terracotta wall here that creates that sense of being anchored to the earth, but also anchored to the adjacent context. And then there's just an image where, as I mentioned, we've kind of pulled the stair out as a freestanding entity, kind of cut it away from the building so you could see a bit more about the detailing. And one of the things that you should also focus on is we've played with the rail and the planter on this whole second level. And you'll notice that it's gotten a little bit more sophisticated in terms of the rail sort of moving in and out in plan. So at certain points, you can be right out at the edge. At other points, the rail steps back and there's a kind of a green barrier between you and what you're seeing. Here you see a notion about changing either the actual stone or the texture of the stone. All of that will be granite. The top of the side of the stringer will be granite. The two faces will be terracotta, and then surrounding the entire second-story plinth will be a granite cap that sort of wraps all the way around. And we're trying to keep that low so the rail feels open and transparent, and the upper terrace feels more sort of visually accessible. Go to the next image, Brian. In terms of just the general look and feel of the terrace and those areas, for the most part, we went through a couple of different iterations in terms of the detailing of the planters, how thick the wall should be, whether the planters should be stone clad or terracotta clad or metal clad. And in the end, we decided to treat the planters as lighter elements that could allow for the most amount of planting in plan, but also so that metal could read in conjunction with the rail and the fascia of the stair and somehow be part of that language and separate and distinct from the stone. The pavers were looking at kind of a 3-to-1 proportion, a kind of a long, thin, rectangular look and feel to the pavers. And then just this general idea of trying to create situations where people can stand and sit next to trees and planters and greenery like you see there. So here's a detail of that portion of the retail that bulges out, again, sort of a cutout of the model that shows that idea of the rail kind of weaving in and out, so that there are some zones where you can stand, be right at the edge. There are other zones where the planting comes in and out again. There are certain areas where the planter jumps up to get more planting depth, so the rail has to jump to create a barrier. All of that, again, wrapped with granite at the coping, terracotta at the face, and then a larger light at that entire first and second level. And it's hard to describe how big those lights will be, but they'll be 7.5 feet wide, which is kind of the biggest standard piece of glass we can get, by sometimes up to 13 feet tall. So very open, very transparent, very clear, so you can see what's happening within, both at the head house and at the retail. And then you see the kind of rectangular pavers weaving it all together. In terms of the detailing of the stairs, here's a couple of images from some previous projects we've done. And what I want you to focus on is this sort of common theme of this tread and riser being stone, the return of the tread and riser being stone, but then transitioning to a painted steel or a formed aluminum fascia that allows you to receive the rail either in that condition or in this condition or outside in that condition. But again, the surface you're walking on is either a thermal flamed granite or a water jet granite, very solid, very slip resistant, feels like it's anchored to the earth. The coping will be stone as well. Delicate handrails as guardrails, and then within the stair we're looking at more of a really simple vertical metal picket, which will give it a sense of, again, anchoring to the earth. So now, and part of what I really like about this idea is we can make these very kind of clean, simple. I love the idea of the shadows they might cast. They also they give us an opportunity to create a situation where we can have maximum transparency, but also minimize the maintenance. You know, I want to show you some options on the cascading stair where we might use glass, but I think at the terrace and at the social stair, the best solution is sort of a really clean, very minimal, almost shaker-like in its simplicity, steel or aluminum picket rail. But now we're going to look at the stair that takes you from the terrace to the garden. And again, you'll see that same detailing where the fascia is a formed metal, which gives you a kind of an interesting silhouette. The risers, treads, and fascia, which are exposed in the step, would be stone. The rail here is shown as the picket that winds its way up, We spent a little bit of time designing the support of the stair here. You see it has a kind of a more sculptural structure to it. The stone cascades down and then becomes the kind of stage or plinth that allows that stair to reorganize its geometry at the terrace level. You see the planters and their relationship to the stone and the metal. And then in this iteration, we're looking at the soffit of the stair being very much like the soffits in the building, that kind of soft, brushed, kind of warm stainless color that runs all the way throughout that. And the stair in section has a sort of a dip and then jumps back up into the soffit. So you read the two rails more strongly, and then the soffit is recessed a bit up above that. So the stair has a kind of a nice expressive cross section and a nice kind of pattern to it. We have taken the seating out of those perches. I think there were really two ideas behind that. Number one, we're starting to feel like we're getting traction on the capturing the top of the head house as a big seating area. So we think there'll be plenty of seating on two. And as we looked at the detailing of this stair and looked at seating here, one of the things we got feedback from our code consultant was any height that you created for a step, you had to push that railing up to compensate. And it created this kind of funny extra fence at those landings, which we thought would be a little bit awkward. So we thought it was better to just hold these three locations as great perches so the handrail can run all the way around, be consistent and continuous. You'll notice in this image also we're showing the frit pattern that marks the elevator that takes you from terrace up to the garden, the entrance to that zone there within the composition, and then obviously the Marriott as the backdrop for that stair, the frit pattern on the glass, and then the large open transparent lights both on 1 and 2. So in previous iterations, this was always on a 7.5 foot module, and then this jumped to a 5. We've made everything now on that 7.5. And probably most importantly, and I think I mentioned this last time, but it's worth reiterating, if you're going to try to make this level and this level look and feel the same, in my view, the most important thing you can do is you pick the exact same glass for both of these. And so that's what we're doing. So 1 and 2 will have the more transparent of the two glasses that we've been showing you. And I can, when I show you the glass samples, I'll show you that. Go ahead, Brian. And so again, consistent with the theme here, you see the stair just pulled out as a sort of freestanding object. In this iteration, you see the metal rail that unites the stringer, ties everything together. You see the kind of V column that we're working on to support that kind of intermediate riser, the setback of the soffit, the kind of brushed luminous underside of the soffit, the stone expression as you go around, as the tread and riser meet the side of the stringer, and then you see this image does a good job of kind of showing the perches and the projections. We also looked at this stair in all glass, and we thought, well, this might be the one place where the more solid metal rail stops at 2, and maybe because this is a kind of a lighter, more open stair, we may look at the idea of that having a glass rail. And there's still obviously the issues related to maintenance, a little less so because the rail's not coming right up against a planter. On the second level where we're having the rail weave in and out of the planter, I'm a little bit worried that dirt and mud will splash up from the planter on that glass rail, and it'll be something that we'll have to constantly maintain relative to the glass. So that's the cascading stair. Here's some images that really start to express this idea of larger transparent lights with a signage band, but fairly clean and minimal in terms of its detailing. So its emphasis on just showing the activity and the life within, a fairly clear glass juxtaposed against a darker value in both of those. And what I like about it is at night, the retail becomes sort of an internal lantern that's drawing you in and activating the street. In the daytime, at corner conditions, you get that transparency and that openness, which I think will be terrific. And then there's kind of a quick view that shows much more. The intention is just to show the relationship of those larger lights between the two floors and how that's different than the 5-foot module that happens above. Again, trying to keep this open and transparent, marking the doors, and then creating a zone within each of those areas where we can have some signage and some louvered areas, so that we can, from a mechanical standpoint, serve those two retail areas. And then Melissa had noted that, the terraces are very much intended to be part of the design of the building and work within the building. So as we work through the curtain wall details, we will start to work through what that rail detail is, et cetera, up at those terraces. And then here's the kind of more simplified section where you see the change in plane between 2 and 1, which provides that protection along Main Street at the facade and creates that kind of pathway under the building parallel from the entrance that's further west all the way across to the entrance to the T head house. You see the lower band of the terracotta, the glass at the second level, and then you see the spandrel at that level starting to take over and the shift in the module. So that's the kind of section there. Melissa mentioned the doors, so the drawings show 2 doors on Main Street as well as 2 doors on the eastern face. The alignment of the doors through the lobby here. And you'll note that we've tried to take all of some of the functions that are occurring within that eastern face and collect them into a single zone. So we've created this kind of common corridor here with bathrooms that are public, the elevator access, as well as the second means of exterior access from the second level terrace. This being the primary up and down, but we need a second means of exit from 2, and so that's in this corridor as well. So grouping all of that into kind of a single function, we think makes sense to kind of make a kind of a collection of those public activities. And then you see the kind of cascading stair here that'll have the greenery that'll carry up between the flights of stairs, the kind of plinth where it lands, this weaving in and out of perch areas with green areas, perch area, green area, perch area. We've tried to clean up this geometry a little bit as it relates to the that trellis and that edicula. Tried to make this stair the right size and the right geometry, still giving some room to the head house. We reorganized the geometry of the bridge so that it follows that, just to kind of clean things up a bit more and have it be a little bit more logical. At this level, you'll see we've indicated either the potential for some operable overhead doors or some other kind of doors on that face, and then try to play the same game with the top of the head house, where it's a combination of green and then perch, green, perch, to get that sort of weaving in and out of the planters and rail. Go ahead, Brian. So the last piece is how do the two buildings come together? And our goal has always been to try to make the two buildings mesh as seamlessly as possible. I would be lying to you if I didn't say that Davis Brody set us up with a fairly difficult problem. And when you look at that building, it's really doing a lot of things at once in a very small area. It's cantilevering out, it's stepping in plan, and in elevation. So you get these kind of funny pockets of space here. You get cantilevers. You get this thing cantilevering. And in the previous iteration, one of our thoughts was let's treat the new aperture with a kind of a flat area and then an area that slopes like the other part of the building. And the more we looked at the detailing of that, the more awkward it seemed in terms of having that angled face meeting this more regular face, creating these very narrow pockets where you had old glass and new glass, sloping glass and vertical glass. And so we kind of went back and looked at this and said, let's try to treat it a little bit more like the condition as it is now. Let some of those surfaces remain plumb and vertical, so they're either a little bit more respectful or deferential to the Davis-Brody geometry, and let's save our angled aperture move for just a plan move in this face once we get into our building, just to simplify things much more. And so that we tried to create a sort of similar view, and so you see all of this now is sort of simple and plumb, right? It's one vertical surface. It allows that soffit to remain. It allows that to still be visible. It allows that kind of captured area space to remain. So that's all plumb, perpendicular, is in some ways deferring more to the Davis-Brody building. We're still carrying a canopy across to mark the entrance. We still have a building column here, but the angle, the kind of aperture language, really only applies to the vertical face to kind of get the bend, and that gives us a kind of a clean, really easy way to take this surface, which is further outboard, and bend it in and make that move. And then again, rather than having this be inclined, we get another soffit surface, which in some ways feels more like that and a little less like that. And so we think that that has helped. It also did something really nice in terms of the interior. It allowed this sloped wall or angled wall, this exterior wall, and then the wall that makes up the division between the public lobby and Google's lobby all meet at a single point. And before, because of the way that slope geometry came in, we couldn't get those all to work together. So there was a kind of a funny moment in plan there that was less resolved. So the piece that we still have to work with Fabrica on is there will be some sort of expansion joint right there. And so for right now, our preference and our predilection is that we're going to try to minimize that, make it as small as we possibly can, but we're also going to try to set it back so it's in a reveal. So whatever happens right there at that critical moment, that'll be returned. So both buildings will return a bit, and then that last face of the expansion joint will be inset within a reveal. And I don't have that specific detail to show you yet because we literally have just handed this piece of our model to the curtain wall guys, and so they're going to come back and give us a sense of what that dimension is, how all that can work. So this is actually, go back really quickly. So we did leave the tree out here. That's just a matter of us modeling and rendering all this in a short period of time. Just to reiterate what Melissa said earlier, this is an occupied terrace, and this is a terrace we're committed to having, plantings, etc. up there. The other thing that's important is the building right here is where the expansion joint will occur as well. So this will be made up of new curtain wall units that will be part of this building, but it will fall on a module that works with the 5cc building. So we're picking the spot where the last module is, pulling the brick off, pulling the kind of antiquated ribbon window, window wall, and replacing that with unitized curtain wall to kind of fill in that portion. But it will follow the modulation of 5 because it has to align with the floor alignments within 5. So here's the kind of DD detail pulled out of the model where you see that vertical surface, this now being able to step a little bit more gracefully. This canopy kind of filling in, providing some protection for that opening. We're still going to have some operability here, as there is now. The debate internally in the studio that we're still studying is where and when does this canopy stop? And it's a little tricky because I feel like I want the canopy to cover the zone where the operability is, but right there you can see it's a little janky because it's lower. And so one of the options is it might angle from that corner, or we might stop it a module short to just kind of clean that little piece up, which still feels a little bit awkward. But some of that depends on, we haven't quite figured out the structure within that canopy. It doesn't show here, but the canopy isn't a solid element. There's a skylight, for lack of a better way to describe it, within the canopy as well, so that even though it's fairly shallow, we want some light to come in here. So that's the one piece we still need to do some work on as we get into design development. And so just to help you understand the relationship between that kind of shaped wooden ceiling that we showed you last time, you remember I did a really horrible drawing where I kind of showed you that V. That's how this section is cut longitudinally through the space. You're looking west. So if you were standing in the space right now, that's Clover, Bailey, and Sage is here. So we're reestablishing that storefront. The wood is going to come down and wrap, but then it kind of wraps up at an angle so that it hits the spandrel condition on each end, and you can see it there. But it's still glassy from here to here in elevation, so you get the mapping of that full space on each side. You kind of get the nice symmetry of the roof doing this in north-south axis, and also doing that kind of similar move in the east-west axis. But more importantly, the location of this plane allows all that kind of funniness that happens in the Davis Brody building to resolve itself outside of the plane of glass. And then just a kind of a fine-grained detail of how all that comes together. And so this is the piece that we need to figure out what its dimension is, how much movement, etc. we need. And we're going to try to minimize that so that's as small as possible. And then here's the area where you have to kind of resolve the continuous line of the canopy with the higher fascia of 5 versus the top of our vestibule here and the rest of our storefront further down. And then here's just a section cut of the southern side where you see the clean cut of the 5cc module and then the glass unitized taking over, but still sort of following. So it's sort of meshing the two. It's the language of 3, but it's the module of 5 to kind of resolve all of that. And part of the logic there is it makes no sense to tear all of that older wall off and rebuild it. It makes much more sense to kind of have this be a clean line, that all be unitized, modern curtain wall versus the kind of old window wall. Just a couple of images that you'll see where we're calling out the zone for retail signage, which is the sort of lighter green, and then we've identified some potential areas where there might be building signage. One of the nice things about the existing connectors, it has, as Kathy mentioned last time, has some of the Google signage on it. So we want to try to identify a zone where they might do some signage. And then when we jump up on 2, so this is the east-facing elevation, a zone here for retail signage, and then a zone here for retail signage on 1, and then targeting potentially to have something that happens with the top aperture eastward facing for some building signage. I don't know what it is, but at least it's kind of, we're giving you a sense of where they might target to put some signage. The other question, go ahead to the next slide, Brian. The other questions that have come up have been relative to the facade. And I guess the best way to sort of summarize what we've heard is we like the idea of the kind of stacked, faceted forms, but is there a way that you could make the distinction between the base, the middle, and the top faceted forms a little bit more pronounced? Is there some sort of texture you could add to the exterior wall? Is there the possibility that texture could provide some shading or at least help mitigate some of the potential glare that might exist within to make the interior comfort for the users better? So we did look at that. And the system that we have designed allows us within the break between the units to add a fin element that sort of projects between the point where the two units come together. So I want to show you what the impact of that would be on the design. Oh, that's a little washed out, but so that's the image that you saw last time of the building. And in just by way of reminder, the base block and the top block have the fritted pattern in the spandrel. The middle block is a little bit more taut. It's just simple glass in the spandrel and the vision. So we were getting the differentiation between those two blocks and that block via the articulation of the spandrel. And so now you see we've added some vertical fins on both of the blocks. And the net effect of that is it makes the top block and the lower block have a little bit more depth and a little bit more richness, a little bit more color. It creates a much stronger distinction between the blocks, and it gives this a bit more of a sense of being more solid, more gridded, a little bit tighter or closer to some of the context. Maybe just flip back and forth between those. So you can, between, yeah. So you can see it when it turns on, what it does to the form. We think it really gives the building a nice add. It knits that horizontal aluminum component that was at the stack joint together to make the building feel a little bit more connected and tied to the column moves and the apertures. Maybe flip one more time. And then I want to show you that at sort of a close-up detail. So now we're going to just zoom in on the connection between the lower block, the middle block, and the top block. So we've just sort of zoomed in. And again, here you see we've added the kind of fins at the top and bottom to give the building a bit more depth and texture and strength. Just flip back and forth, yeah. And so, as I mentioned, the way that we're achieving that is we're adding essentially an I-beam form, or half of an I-beam form at the vertical joint, and it sort of slides in and plugs in. And we have the detail to show you that. So it's essentially a kind of a half a beam shape. It ties into the gap. So this is a moment where two curtain wall units are coming together, and that's why this mullion is split. And so it attaches to one side, jogs, and comes out and projects beyond. So it'll be around 3 inches by 6 inches. And again, on the east and west faces, when the sun gets lower and more horizontal, it'll do some amount of shading, but it will also help on all of the facades in terms of cutting back some of that glare and some of that heat gain right at the first 5 or 6 feet within the building. One of the things to keep in mind as we're looking at glass and at the performance of the building is we're in Boston, and so unlike, say, if we were doing a building in Dallas or Atlanta or Southern California, we're trying to balance the performance of the glass for both seasons. So we do have to keep the heat gain out, but we also have to have a glass that performs well enough to do that, but also lets a little bit of heat gain in the winter months to help us cut down on the heating load. So that should we show the glass image? Yeah. This is a little 1 foot by 3 foot shadow box that we've built kind of ad hoc in our studio because we have these 1 by 1 samples of the glass. So we create a kind of a shadow box so you can get a sense of what the glass would look like when it has space behind it. You know, you don't really want to look at a piece of glass like this because you never see it like that, right? You always see it in a condition like when you look out the window. It has shadow, it has depth, it has space beyond. And so the shadow box, which we photoshopped out, creates that sense of depth so you can read the glass. And all we tried to do was take the vision glass, which is at the top here, the spandrel glass, and then the kind of deep Venetian red color here, and show you what happens as we kind of just spin it relative to the sunlight. So here it's getting almost direct sunlight. So you can see the light is being cast on the side of the shadow box. And that gives you a sense of how transparent this glass is. And then I mentioned to you that because of the makeup of that spandrel unit, that layer of frit on the number 2 surface will cast a shadow on the number 3 surface. So in certain lights, you'll get a lot of depth in that spandrel. In other lights, like this, where it's tilted and that number 1 outer layer is catching more light, it'll be a little less visible and sort of fade away a bit. So the spandrel will be very active depending on the light condition. But I also know there was some debate last time about the value of the color, and Tom asked a very direct question. Are the members of the board comfortable with a building that's darker in value? And I want to assure you that this building, although the accents are dark, as you saw in the rendering, they really make up the outer filigree. But I think what's also important to focus on is, because of the nature of the paint that we're using, even that darker color, as it changes in terms of how it's catching the light, its character will change a lot. So lots of dynamic qualities to the spandrel, but also dynamic qualities relative to that kind of deeper Venetian red color as well. So the other thing I want to leave you with relative to the appearance of the glass is, I know some of you are looking at, and I apologize, I don't know the name of the building, the number of the building. It's a multifamily building. It has a lot of dark anodized panels on it. It's right across the street from the CRA office space. It's kitty corner from our building. Our building will not in any way, shape, or form ever read as darkly as that building. Number one, we have more glass, less metal, but also the glass that we're using is much more open and much more transparent. The glass on that building 4, is that what you called it, Tom? It has a dark bronze tint on it. So the building metal is dark and the glass itself is very dark. This building in some ways is much more akin to 145 Broadway in that it's a combination of glass and metal. The big difference, though, is the 145 Broadway, it has a reflective silver coating on it. So that building, in most lights, it reads as more blue and a little bit more reflective. This building will be more transparent. It's by nature, the visual light transmittance on this is much higher than 145, and the exterior reflectance is much lower than 145 Broadway. Did we put the building from New Haven in? So somebody on the board said to me, "Do you have a picture of a building that has the glass that you have and that has some frit so we could understand it?" This is a building that's being built on Yale's campus right now. That's Philip Johnson's Klein Biology. I put this in because its context is a red brick building, but what I really want you to focus on, number one, this is maybe not the exact same glass we're proposing. I believe this is a Viracon VNE 163. Right now we're looking at an Interpaint product, but it would be like it's virtually almost an identical glass, just a different manufacturer. It would I wish I could think of a great analogy. It would be like, you know, this is a Chevy Impala and we're showing you a Ford Galaxy. You know, they're both almost identical, just different manufacturers. And what really you should focus on, first of all, the glass has sort of a lighter grayish green tint to it, but it's much more open and transparent. And I think that combination of transparency, although this building is red, it's a much brighter, much orangier red than what we're proposing, but that combination of the glass value and the general hue of the building, I think, makes a really nice building. And I know you're worried about it being dark, but I think in the end, when you see the building, you'll be surprised at how open and light and transparent it is. So that's really all I have. I definitely went longer than I had anticipated. I wanted to do this really quickly and succinctly, but I hope that begins to kind of address the open-ended questions that we had from last time. And I'd just like to thank you again for your patience. Thank you for your input. Thank you for letting us come back on such short notice and fitting us into your schedule. The building is better. It's getting better. We're really happy with the outcome and where we are. And any questions or comments or anything that you want me to elaborate on, I'm happy to do that.
Board members, questions, comments? Anyone?
I think it's a tremendous improvement in terms of the quality of the facade and the design of it. I love the fins. I'm liking this color more today for some reason, because it reads more red, I think, both in the presentation and even here tonight. Maybe it's just the angle I'm looking at it from. But
I remember last time you said, it looks like black to me.
yeah, and I love dark colors and black, but I can actually, today I can see the red and can understand how in certain lights it's going to seem a little lighter. So I like that. I also like the fact that the second set of stairs going up to the roof garden, that you changed the material there to the darker aluminum color, I think it was, to kind of match that red color. I think it gives the stairs more weight and prominence in that area. And I think in terms of the railing, I'm not so sure that I like the idea of glass on going up there either. I prefer the pickets, but I would leave that. That's a really minor detail. So whatever works for others is fine by me. But all in all, I think, particularly, and then the connection between the two buildings, I think you've done a wonderful job in sort of refining those issues from where we were the last time as well. So.
Don't all speak at once.
Okay. Yeah, I thank you. I think that there have been a lot of refinements and sort of attention to some of the comments that we made at the last meeting. I appreciate the sort of attachment to the earth and the place and the sort of attention to the, as much as you can, and it's sort of corporate character, attention to the site and whatever character exists there. I have a couple of questions about the ability of the, I guess, the structural integrity to support plantings and whether we need to discuss that. I just wanted to mention that again as a point of interest for me, and as much greenery, whether it's, plant trees, shrubs, grasses, mosses, the like, that the structure can hold. I continue to investigate those possibilities. just to add some, I guess, organic texture to the sort of granite and all the terracotta and the glass and the metal, and to really sort of get back to some of the more softer elements, if possible. And looking at the street and the trees that are planted along there, I know that's outside of the project limits, but during our the city's discussion on the Urban Forestry Master Plan Task Force, there's been some discussion of the importance of trees as communities, and not just looking at one planting or even one height going through, sort of looking at understory. And I think that might add some more of that texture that I was sort of alluding to, that you have the ability to look at with the terrace and the roof garden. But again, sort of partnering with what's going on with DPW and others. And then on the sort of exterior of the building, glare, and I'm guessing, but again, I'm not an expert in this area, so some of the additional elements that you've added, would that help sort of add some more shade so direct sunlight wouldn't reflect directly onto the street or elsewhere, as it might with mostly glass buildings? So that's another added benefit, perhaps? Okay. Yeah, that's what I have for now. Okay.
Okay, well, since I didn't get to speak last time, I'll raise a couple questions. Could you go back to the lower level stairs? Yeah, that's fine. How wide are the stairs on the right-hand side? I mean, it's nice that you have the seating area and those double stairs, but people aren't going to climb them. And what it seems to me, you forced everybody into a very narrow pathway on the right-hand side. And I'm just concerned that it's not going to be comfortable for people. If you've got a couple walking side by side, I don't know that they can do it. Yes, please.
So the width of that portion from there to there is approximately 5 feet in that zone. But we could look at having this sort of step and sort of cascade, so it does get a little bit wider, so it's a little bit
Yeah,
more
I mean,
proportional.
I don't know what two people walking side by side, it seems to me that they're pretty close to 5 feet, and you've got railings on both sides, and it feels that you're just squeezing people together to create a very nice area with people sitting on it. But, you know, people my age are not going to do 2 steps at a time.
Right.
So I think you should think about that. My second concern is about the elevator. So obviously the elevator from the ground level is clear where it is and where it's taking you to. But then the other elevator is tucked away behind this. It's a very nice staircase, but you're really going to need to have some massive sign there, something, you know. If it were me, I'd put a giant neon arrow and say elevator. But, you know, it's already unwieldy to have to switch elevators. And if you ever try to take the elevators in South Station, where you go into one and then you have to get out, you have to wheel your luggage to another place and take another elevator, you're creating the same situation here. And maybe that's okay, but certainly the elevator at the second level up to the top has really got to be very obvious and very clear and very comfortable for people to take.
Yeah, and just to be clear, this elevator allows you to go from the garden all the way to ground, so you
Okay.
can enter and go up. You could also take the elevator in the front and go back. We did have,
And so you can take it from the ground up. And
Correct.
do you have an image that shows what that looks like there?
so you would enter it there, off of the kind of porte cochere in front of the.
Right. Again, that's got to be really signed so that people know it's there. I mean, to get into the garden right now, you know, you're walking through buildings and it's hidden, and it is, you know, we're ending up with a smaller garden, a smaller rooftop garden, and it's got to be very obvious to people that they are very welcome up there and that it's easy to get to and that it's not a private garden just for the tenants of that building.
Yeah, and I think that's a great conversation and observation. We have gone through a couple of different iterations on that elevator as we've met with the design review committee over these several months, and we've looked at kind of progressively different locations for that elevator, and ultimately we got very clear, very strong direction that the elevator be embedded in the building such that it didn't create a further blockage on that opening in that aperture. Some of our earlier studies had it further out, but the design review committee felt that that was too much of a impediment on that opening, and as a result of that, we've moved the elevator inboard to respond to those comments.
Yeah, I understand that, and I'm not criticizing that choice, but I think, you know, the public has to know, you know, if you're not going to be walking up, which, you know, will be great in good weather and for people who are, you know, good at climbing stairs, but for people who want to go up there with the elevator, it's got to be really very obvious. Here's a very comfortable, clearly defined elevator for you to get up.
And our plan is to, as part of this composition, incorporate some signage so you know the elevator is there, and the similar fashion on the garden side. We'll do the same.
Okay. Do you have a rendering that shows the facade looking at it from the Volpe site across Broadway?
We do, and we showed that at the last meeting. Would you like to see it
I
again
would.
at this meeting?
Yes, I wasn't at the last meeting.
Sure,
So.
happy to do that. Brian, can you? This is the image that we showed last time of the northern facade of the building.
Right.
You see the garden here. You see the gap or the aperture between the building. This is actually a little bit out of date. This is now in that zone there. So this is slid slightly westward. And then you see how the building sort of steps back for the elevator, the existing elevator along Pioneer Way here.
And now, can I presume that there will be these new
Yes,
beams
yeah. So we
running
didn't
up and down it?
we didn't update this, but this facade would have the additional fins here and the additional
Right.
fins on that face.
Right. Well, my concern is from the street, from Broadway, what you see is a glass block. And now the fins will help. I like your apertures. I mean, I think they're nice. Why aren't they on all the facades? I mean, I don't, it seems to me it's much too timid. And that, you know, we're just getting one glass block after another, and I understand it's relating to the ones across Main Street to MIT, but, you know, they're folding the buildings, they're doing other things. and I like the apertures on the Main Street side, and it seems to me you could really expand upon that idea and make this facade much more interesting than just a flat glass block.
There will be one of them visible here because the edges are transparent, so you'll see that one there. And then, although this isn't an aperture, the building steps in, and so that point there is where it's the thinnest between the two buildings. I guess the other answer I would give you is we're trying to make the apertures correspond to usable terraces on the inside. So each one of these right now, this one, the ones on the other side, as well as the roof, are planned to be occupied by the tenant.
Well, they could just be decoration, but I would suggest you think about that some more, because I'm concerned. I mean, yes, now here you're several stories up and you're looking across the garden, but looking from Broadway and across Broadway, looking up, all you're going to see is a flat glass wall. The new fins, I think, will help, but I really think there could be some more decoration there in some manner. And as I say, I like the apertures, and if you wanted to pursue that, I think that would be fine. And it seems to me there could be an aperture on the side, facing over the existing building. I just, I think it's a good idea that you could expand upon. Those were really, my major concerns about things, and I guess it's your board's turn.
I find much to like, particularly like the thoughtfulness of the detail of the connection to the neighboring building, and the thoughtfulness and the detail of the terraces. One question I had, could you show again the vision of the building when you were moving from the more opaque to the one with the vertical dark? Yeah, this is the one I want. My, I guess, question to not an architect, untutored eye is, I first wonder whether the detail of the dark lines, if you will, whether that's really, in terms of its at least the intuitive visual reaction I have, is consistent with your earlier statement that you want, which I liked and I understand, sort of lower part connected to the earth and perhaps lighter and airier as you go up. And it seems to me, at least my intuitive reaction to this is that's inconsistent with this. Seems to me, at least in the rendering, at least in my reaction to it, sort of darker, heavier, less light and airy. And the second aspect, again, and a very subjective aesthetic reaction, is, could you go back to the one without that the lines seem to me, the dark verticals, transform, again, what my reaction is lighter and somewhat airier as we're going up, as one goes up, and partly that there is a uniformity that makes it perhaps the top section more floating compared to the lower sections, which gives an impression, which at least, again, very individual subjective reaction I like. Whereas if you put up the alternative side, all of a sudden it's very busy, and in a way that's it's sort of busy and, at least on one reaction, a little bit distracting, and sort of the sort of calm, airy feeling of the sort of general opaque look is it's certainly completely contrasted, but in a way that it's so busy I find very jarring. And my reaction is that's not light and lighter in areas we go up, though I suppose on one view it's certainly more interesting, but the busyness, I'm just wondering if that's, again, what you're after. It gives the impression, again, in the rendering a little bit of breaking down into multiple windows, all these little squares, anyway, I guess I find that a little less aesthetically pleasing. A bad analogy, it's nowhere close, but would be if, it's sort of the International Place building, which is this mass of tiny little windows, which I think is, and again, I don't mean to suggest in any way this is anywhere near this, but it's sort of, there's at least a bare analogy to my reaction that it's sort of the kind of busyness and distraction as opposed to it being lighter and airier going up. And I'm always reminded when I look at that building of the Globe critics. Again, I don't mean to suggest it's true here, but I'm amused by the Globe critics' comment that it was if the developer had an affair with a window salesman. But I wonder about that, again, to the very untutored eye.
That's the Bill Johnson building?
No, this is the Chair Faro. I don't know, actually, I don't know who the architect is. It's International Place 1, which, I think is personally pretty hideous. But, and this is nowhere near, so I perhaps shouldn't even mention in the same conversation.
Philip Johnson.
Is it Philip Johnson?
Yeah.
But I wonder, so I'd be curious what you'd say about
it's
that.
an interesting comment. I think of it more as defining surfaces. So this portion of the building and this portion of the building are coplanar, whereas this portion of the building, the apertures and the portion that's between the new building and 5 are all set back. So it's almost as if you've taken an apple and you kind of have carved it. And so where it's carved or set back, it's a little more taut. And then the outer skin that you see here is a little more rough and textured. And I think the net effect when you kind of, this does it just purely horizontally, but I think the combination of that portion being more taut, wrapping around, and then these surfaces which are kind of coplanar with that, when you look at it in composition with 5, it sort of makes sense how that comes together, that sits, and then all of this other portion that's set back and carved away is of a slightly different language. And I think when you see the kind of model in the round, even though this doesn't have the verticals and that doesn't, you see the more dense, and I think it helps that and creates an interesting, more holistic composition. I can see where when you look at it from that single view, it doesn't work as well, but I think when you see the final building built, it'll work well and it'll compose well.
That's really all I had.
Board members? Tom? Hugh?
I have a couple
Lou?
of them with the big guys.
I was saving you for last.
Kind of torn on the fins, but I think they'll really make it pop, so I think they're appropriate. Can you go back to the examples of your stairs, the second story? Yes. My one big problem with the set of stairs going to the roof garden, it's opposing the traffic. And you try to do it with the plinth coming down into the direction of the traffic, but the last stringer on that stairway cuts across the direction of travel. Doesn't look very appealing, doesn't say come walk in here. Looks like it needed another landing and a short run in the direction of the travel. I like all the other changes you made with the railing and so forth, but these are more appealing. And the other just, it dead ends into a railing, and the plinth doesn't really work as well. It's not as inviting. One of my concerns is, will this terrace have enough sun to grow much vegetation?
Christian Lemon, Lemonbrook, landscape architect. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly going to be, it won't be full sun species, but we are proposing to put bamboo in between the stair there and the triangular planters, so you get some vertical landscape, because that can be planted at its full height when it goes in. You'll have some, might say, instant green. There's many different varieties. We haven't got into that level of specificity. And then as we move farther away from the building, the planters that are closer to the plaza there, they get more sun. So there'll be varying degrees, things that are more shade tolerant, things that can handle more sun. So all this gets better. It'll get better light than, let's say, the southernmost edge of the garden that we had talked about before. So we can certainly accommodate the green there.
Good, I'm glad to hear that. I was concerned that nothing would really grow there, because there's been shadow there.
No, yeah.
Let's see. Yes, and I guess this is for Boston Properties. The optional terraces. So if the tenant doesn't decide to plant them, do anything with them, they just stay as they are.
Yeah, there'll be architectural elements. There'll be apertures on the building.
Would make the building a lot more appealing if it was planted. I think Boston Properties. And will there be access to them built with the base building? There'll be access out to them, I'm sure.
Yeah, there has to be access out for maintenance, so there'll be access doors. But I can tell you that the tenant is highly interested in occupying all of them. So we're just working through the process with them. I can't commit that they're going to occupy all of them, but that's really what they want to do.
I'm looking for you to commit to planting them if they don't.
It's their space, so I can't plant on their behalf.
Okay. They need to be planted. They just turn into glass notches without any greenery. It doesn't make the building more appealing. I know they're architectural features, but I'm curious around the corner on 88 Ames if that's ever going to get planted also. So I'm curious. I'm in the neighborhood every day, so I want to see how this goes. It would soften this building a little bit. I think the addition of all the extra detail helps, but some green would hurt, especially since we put this roof garden in shade. All the extra greenery you can do would be a plus.
Understood.
Not sure where to start. The grid has me sort of two minds. The original scheme talked about sort of displacing the Davis Brody building mass up and over, and that reading as a mostly horizontal thing had a logic to it, which is somewhat turned around by the gridding of the thing. Turns it into it's very handsome, but it's a different thing, and I'm not sure whether that is meaningfully important or not. Be interesting to see the head-on elevation, although you'll never see the building that way, with the grid. I'm also curious, do you really intend to run the extra mullion elements down the sloping glass in the apertures? It seems like you might give up at that point with the with the extra section, or maybe not.
Yeah, no, the apertures won't have the eye section.
Yeah, okay.
It'll be cut.
Yeah, it
it'll
looks
be
like
taught.
they do
Yeah.
for now. Okay, so
I think really what you're seeing in that
I'm
rendering
seeing
is
a
the
reflection of something.
the mullion beyond.
Yeah.
'Cause-
Okay. Okay. I think almost everything else you've done is a huge improvement. Some of the moves are more more unrelenting than I guess I would do. The doubling of the glazing on the second floor. If you were so moved to interrupt that once or twice with the original module, you could do that, right? I mean, it would interlock the second and third floors. I don't know if that's an improvement or not, but and likewise the walls along the first stair, might those at some point come up along the stair and replace the railing, for instance? Just a thought again. A question about the corridor that goes to the elevator on the second level. I'm sorry, on the first level. I assume that even though that's an egress access, you're able to glaze the part that faces the retail? Because otherwise it's going to be a not good place. Yeah. Yeah.
The intention is that is a very good place, but that it can be accessed no matter what the
Right.
retail ends up being
Right.
there. I think we talked
Right.
about this briefly at the last meeting, and so we've taken another look at that, and that's one of the other reasons that we've relocated those public restrooms up into that zone.
Right. No, that's an
because that
improvement.
seems to
Yeah,
make
yeah.
sense
Yeah.
from an access
Yeah.
for the public standpoint, to make sure that that's always accessible when the garden is open.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with the stair width thing. The stairs into the subway are about 7 feet wide, and they're more than adequate, but that might be the right dimension.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's just a mistake in our model. It should be
Yeah.
wider. I think my sense is that that south wall along that corridor, I think we can make that glass even though that's a exit from the terrace above. It might mean we have to put sprinkler heads on each side of it, but I think it's doable.
Yeah, I mean, there's some new glass, I guess, that is helpful in that respect. The joint with the Davis Brody building at the ground is much better now. I was really sort of despairing about how that could ever get right. I wonder if it's worth noting that the first floor piece where the corner of Clover is actually an addition to the Davis Brody building, and you're fighting with that over your canopy. I don't know if that means that it's partially changeable or what. Otherwise, I guess you really just have to stop a little bit short with the canopy. I don't know other way to do that, but it works much better now. The piece of new curtain wall along the side, though, I mean, I understand why you're doing that. It seems, I don't know, not quite wonderful yet, but maybe it doesn't matter very much.
We looked at another scenario where we sort of stair-stepped it.
Yes, that
and
would, yeah.
It just looked really
Work.
awkward.
Yeah, all right.
It seemed to
yeah.
make it overly complex, whereas the sort of clean line. And when we showed that first idea to the general contractor, he just looked at us like we were crazy. Just the
I know
amount
that
of
look, yes.
the amount of trigger work and kind of trying to
Yeah,
preserve
all
it. He
right.
said, just give me a clean line that I can remove it. It's going to be, it's also so far up there.
Yeah, it's not going to be very visible, I think, from the street at all. I'm wondering about the comments about the backside of the building being too plain. I wonder how visible that actually is from anywhere other than the roof garden. And I think there's a logic to having the apertures facing the sun and not having them where they're in the dark. So I'm all for more articulation, but if it doesn't actually do anything helpful, it's probably all right to not have it on one side. So I guess that's about it for me for now.
The one piece that you went a little too quickly for me to keep up was the comment that you made about the glass on the third floor. You're saying that maybe that wants to be on the 7.5 as well?
Well, no. If a couple of them were on the 5, no. If a couple of the third floor widths dropped into the second floor width, so that you got a sort of a tooth interlock, not uniformly, but just as a. That would have been my automatic inclination, just to mix it up a little bit. But your choice, right?
I hate the idea that the facade doesn't directly represent the program that's happening beyond, and it just seems strange to have retail on a 7.5 and then suddenly switch to a 5. But that device may help us turn some corners or solve some tricky areas. So
yeah, if it worked, it would help. That's all. And the accompanying comment about the railings was that if some places the wall actually came up to be the railing or even get higher than the railing, that might help you get a little bit of stability to the railing and a bit of change. Well, I agree that keeping it mostly transparent is important, really important. So what you've done makes sense, yeah. And the perches and all of that are good, very good. And I guess I would say to the point about the second stair, I think your intention was to make it visible by presenting it as sort of head-on the way you do. And in fact, you enter it by continuing your direction for the first 3 steps. I'm a little worried about what happens in that wedge underneath. You've hidden that with that person standing there. But it's always an awkward bit. But
yeah, in the plan and the model right now, we're actually pulling that planter so that it's almost to that outer edge. So imagine the first step returns, the second step returns, so you can sit on it, and then everything beyond that is a planter. You can sort of see it there.
But underneath the first major run, there's still a place for
that's a
very
planter.
small people. Or that's a planter.
That's a planter.
Okay.
So the edge wraps. You'll be able to sit on the second step, but beyond that is planter.
Yeah. Well, good.
Susanna, I think you're saying this for the first time too. Do you have any comments you'd like to make?
Okay.
Thank you. We are seeing it for the first time tonight as well, so there's quite a few improvements. I think at the ground level, the space around the head house has improved and it seems much more welcoming. It's not as tight. And we're pleased to see the commitment to the retail entrances on Main Street and the plaza side. We feel we had comments in our memo about a two-story expression for the first and second floors, and I think the change to the mullion pattern has helped, but it does still read as a single-story expression, so that would be an outstanding comment from our perspective. With the upper terrace, I think there were comments from the planning board about making that visually more prominent. I think there was a different frit pattern previously that was more vertical rather than the horizontal for the elevator. So something bolder perhaps could be an improvement. And just behind the upper stair, we think there could be some additional vegetation or screening along the parking garage just to enhance that sort of green connection to the rooftop garden. The board seems to have discussed the lower stair. I guess the railing between the stair and then the seating, I had hoped wasn't there, but I guess it's probably a code issue. Yeah. So, but I think making the sort of travel stair element wider will help, and we hope also that there are plantings spilling down the edge of the parapet as well, because that's the terracotta is quite blank there. With the facade changes, I think the glass choice is very good, and I'm really impressed with the transparency and the reflectance. I think it's an improvement on most of the I think all of the curtain wall buildings that the planning board has reviewed recently, so it will be quite transparent. And the mullion detail does provide depth. I think I'm a little conflicted about it as well, whether it should, I think at the lower level it seems to make sense, but then just how it works with the middle and the top is, I think there could still be some thought with that element. But overall, I think the improvements are a positive. And the most of the issues the planning board raised have been spoken about tonight.
Thank you.
Just one really quick comment. The issue of taking the first and second floor and combining them into one element, you really have to think about the scale of that. Both of those floors are 16-foot floor to floor. And so if we were standing on the street right now and that wall were the storefront, the terracotta, I'm just guessing by the height of that door, the terracotta probably would just almost be touching the upper portion of this room, which I think feels about right for the pedestrian scale. To take that move and double that height, so it's almost 3 stories in the air. I get the idea, but I think it's the wrong move. It's already a pretty high floor to floor, so to lose that datum at 16, I think is doing the wrong thing for the city. But that's just my observation. It's really high.
Margaret, you wanna?
Sure. It just keeps getting better. I think there's a lot of, I like a lot of things about it. I really like the cascading stairs, and I like the fins and the apertures. I had a thought that those steps were a little narrow too, the ones from the, yeah. And the retail, I think that, I'm not sure. I see your point about that would be very high, but I don't know if there's some other way to do it, because otherwise I think it's going to be, the second floor retail is going to really be more perilous. So if there's any way to do that without making bigger, taller windows. I think that's something to think about. Just some way that you can understand from the street that there are really 2 floors of retail. And the other thing, I guess I'm going to take your word for it, that it's not going to be dark. It looks to me, when I see the little samples, they're dark little samples. So, but you know, you've come through on all the other stuff, so I'll trust you on this.
You?
So often I speak first, but it's sort of a joy to have everybody else bring up all the important points. I think the bottom line is we've seen enough progress on the things we were worried about to say we could approve this from the planning board point of view, knowing that there's still more development and that the things that have been talked about tonight can be addressed in that context. But so I have some suggestions on things to work on. Tony, you're probably not aware that Building 4 starts out as dark browns at the bottom and ends up pretty light at the top. Yeah, so it's a play on the Battery March building in Boston, which does that in brick, or did that in brick about 100 years ago. I'm wondering if maybe when you add all of that metal on the outside and the fins, you have to rethink the color a little bit. So my first thought was, well, the top could be lighter than the bottom, but I don't think you want to do that, and I don't think that's probably right. But maybe you have to take a little bit of the black out of the black-red color, make it just a little bit lighter, and that might help the lightness of the overall mass. So in the elevator lobby on the ground floor, to get to the elevator up to the roof, I think that's a very good move in plan. I think you do need to have quite a bit of glass between that lobby and the retail area, but probably it doesn't have to be 100%. It has to sort of be at the places where people are moving, because the retailers, if it's glass, they're going to want to use that for display, and so it's not going to be open. You're not going to really see through it all. You need to see that there's a space there. However, finding that elevator lobby is a challenge because it's under the trellis work. And I think the solution is in the intersection of signage and sculpture. That if there's a sign hanging in the trellis that is wonderful and sculptural and also somehow lets you know there's an elevator there. And I don't presume to tell artists what materials to use, but I think, it has to be a feature in a way just as much a feature as a rooftop is. Do you get Tiffany glass flowers spelling out the word? I don't know, but I'm sure that you think about it that way. And then if good, you've got this picture up. So I think I know what the answer to the criticism about the second floor is. And I think you're going to hate it, but I think what you should do is put in maybe 3 reverse bays. Now, a reverse bay is where you take, like you have 4 bays of glass out at the front, or 3, and then the next 1 or 2 get pushed back to the same plane as the first floor, so that you get in that long stretch on the second floor changes of plane. But the plane is, it's not very much, it's only back, and you stop that at the spandrel. It's really only it's the glass in the spandrel below that gets pushed back. And one thing that does is it creates bay windows. It means you have 3 sort of wide bay windows, or 4 wide bay windows, and 3 recesses, but those corners become display opportunities for retailers, and that I think it could be because the things that are in the corners get a lot more light and you see them a lot more. So that's my suggestion as a way of doing that. Now, I presume there's a beam at that spandrel level, which I'm telling you you've got to cut. That's why I think you might not like it, but I'm sure it can be. It's just steel, you can make it work. The columns are back, obviously. So those are my suggestions, and so what goes unsaid is what my colleagues have said, which is we've put a bunch of problems before you to work on, and you've worked on them, and you've made tremendous progress. And in my view, it's sufficient progress for us on the planning board to vote tonight to send it on to the next stages.
Tom?
Well, as I said in one hearing, I think during the course of this review, never go last, because you have to figure out something smarter than the last 20 people said. But and most people, I'm actually in my notes showing the chair delighted to see that many people are hitting on some of the same points. But I wanted to start by thanking you for giving us the stair details. Thank you for giving us the fins and giving it a vertical sense, so it looks less like a prison uniform and more kind of like a fancy dress shirt. Actually, Hugh, I think, addresses Chris Bader's comments about and his concern about the fins. I think if you do change the color as you move up the building, that might address your concern about lightness, and it would give a difference between the bottom and the top. So since they're painted or anodized, I think Hugh's absolutely onto something there. Thank you for the entry details. It's getting rich and interesting and evolving in a really cool way. And thank you for the encouraging news on the T that we're maybe going to be able to pull that off on top of the box. That's seismic for me. I commute on the Red Line every day in Central Square for the last 30 years. I really wish if you could work on one more problem. At the base of the stair there's a pool of water, and there's a cone, a safety cone that's been there for 30 years, and somebody needs to work on the drain. So after you get that done, I'd really appreciate it if you use your influence to get that addressed, because it's been under construction for that long. Now, I think the stair, the upper stair, we worked on it and worked on it. Thank you for the details. I still, I'm sorry that the landings got shorter. I'm sorry the landings got shorter because it makes it look conventional, and maybe there's a way to extend them so you have a kind of a perch or something that you could occupy to make some of the season ticket holders here at the planning board could make speeches from there to the plaza, which leads me to the plaza, because I was actually really intrigued with what Hugh was saying about the trellis. There was a promise, and I forget whether it was in design review or here at the planning board in the joint hearings, to potentially demolish portions of the plaza, not the plaza, the trellis. Maybe that's the way to mark the entrance to the elevator that Hugh's asking about. But it made me think about that plaza again, and I know I've said this before. The orientation towards the Main Street with the stair, and to Ted's comment, is it big enough? Could we get another stair, another connection, either by demolishing some of that trellis and inserting something? So there was a way that this second level addressed the existing plaza that's there. It seems unaltered. This seems to, all our construction seems to be inserted west of the tee box, and I think we've missed an opportunity there to engage an existing public space. So I know I emailed the staff, and I hope they shared with you the email. Well, actually, before I go that there was a perspective in the book, and you were in Vietnam, so I don't know if you saw it, page 22, an elevation, a perspective taken from the Volpe site. You will see the building from there. I had notes back when my peak was slightly higher saying, is this the best we can do, which just was a blank glass wall, and I appreciate fellow members of the panel that are suggesting that I think we can do better. I think the fins will help, and I think Ted was suggesting that maybe one of the balconies could help there. Lastly, yes, the email I sent to staff, and I hope they shared it with you relative to the thermal performance. Look, the city wants to move to net zero. At least that's what the ad hoc task force was promising, and commercial buildings were supposed to hit net zero by 2025. So we may be looking at the last all glass building that gets built in Cambridge, because I'm not sure how you do that without going to a higher performance envelope than what we're looking at here. I'm not in a position to debate the really fine engineers that are here tonight to talk about all the ways in which the EUI will be at 33, despite experience with my tech clients that drive in the plug load, their EUI's north of 80. I'm not in a position to really debate these guys. I had asked in my email whether we could have independent debate, and maybe that properly happens at further design review. So just lastly, to Hugh's comment about, are we ready to vote, and the building and the project is getting better and better and better. There's no question. But I think there's also no question that the process is really hard. It's really hard on the proponent. It's really hard on the board and the board members. It's really hard on staff. I'm really worried that Google's going to throw a switch on my personal search engine, and when I ask what the capital of Belgium is, it's going to come back and insist that it's Philadelphia. And before Google gets even more impatient, and when children in Boston and children in Cambridge inquire about who's going to win the World Series next year, the answer does not come up as the Boston Red Sox. And I can understand the frustration. So I have been to the subcommittee hearings with Hugh. I've seen the really intense back and forth that we have there, and the genuine movement by the petitioner and the petitioner's architect to move the project relative to the comments and the feedback that they get back at those hearings. So I too am ready to kick it to the next phase, to say the planning board is done with this and that it should move to the next design phase, that with the confidence that both the proponent and the architect will take the comments that were made tonight seriously and continue to refine and adjust the building. So I'm gonna check that Google after this, see what happens. They'll probably tell me what numbers to play in the lottery, right? Okay, that's where I am. Thank you.
Will they tell you the Patriots will win the Super Bowl next year? Okay. So if there are no further comments, then I guess the question for the planning board is, are we ready, excuse me, are we ready to proceed with the vote to approve the design review? Everyone seems to say yes.
From the CRA board, I would entertain a motion. What? That's a very good point.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess the question, was there public comment taken at last?
Yes, there was.
There was. So then I would think we ought to continue with that and take public comment. And I guess your board takes public comment too. So is there, I don't know, was there a sign-up sheet at all? Jeff? No? So is there anyone who would like to speak? If so, come forward and state your name and address for the record. And we ask that you speak only for 3 minutes. And I don't know whether the lights are all functioning. And Heather, you certainly know the drill about the lighting system.
Heather Hoffman, 213 Hurley Street, and I said most of my piece last week, but the trees that I see in these pictures made me wonder, as a few members of these two boards had asked, like, what's actually going to grow here? It feels to me as though the suggestion of trees in the roof garden is a snare and a delusion, and I'd love to be wrong. But I would really like to know what will actually grow here. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Apparently not. So I think, is it Mr. Lemon is here from the landscaping company? Are you able to respond to that question today?
I can speak to that. Yeah, in general, in past presentations, we did do I would say, a schematic design development analysis of different varieties of species that would grow in full shade to part sun conditions. We know that plants, different kinds of plants grow in different conditions. We can pull that, Brian, I don't know if you have those slides. We can show that for the roof garden. The conditions on the second floor terrace that Lou brought up, that gets morning sun, eastern exposure, so there will be more sun on the planting of the second floor terrace there. But I'm not going to I can't go into specific species exactly today, so. So this is a variety of trees, shrubs, and perennials that our plant specialists in our office have gone through and identified that could work in different conditions. And if we go to the next, or the slide just before that, and this was the mapping based on the sunshade analysis that Sasaki had done. We had taken that and looked at, in the existing planter beds that exist today, how would we appropriate those different species throughout the plaza. So again, we have plants that are good for partial sun, partial shade, and shade tolerant plants. So it does require extra work, it does. We're going to have to sharpen our pencil and really get down to all the different kind of species and so forth. But we have 2 or 3 people in our office that are superb plants people and are very engaged to figure out, how to make this successful. It will be different than it is today. I think we've all acknowledged that. But I know we are very invested in trying to make that retain the garden feel there, but with the new microclimate conditions. So, and happy to answer any other further questions.
That's fine, thank you. It's been called to my attention that there was one issue that actually I don't believe has been addressed this evening with regard to the bicycle parking access. And if somebody could speak to that, I'd appreciate that.
So Melissa Schrock with Boston Properties again. While Brian's pulling up the graphic, I just want to talk a little about the context within which the bike parking is being analyzed and studied in conjunction with our tenant. So, as you know, the tenant of this building is also the primary tenant, and soon to be the only tenant for the most part, in the other two adjacent buildings, 5cc and 4cc. So we're working with them to really understand what I would say is an evolving and global campus-wide bike parking need. So that's part of the reason that the solution isn't necessarily fully fleshed out today. What we do know is that the parking for this building, this new building, will be located in the basement of this new building. And the question that's been raised is, how are you going to access it? So what we've shown in our initial submission is the primary, initial thinking of how it would be accessed, which essentially would come either from Main Street or from Pioneer Way on your bike as a bike commuter. You would come in through the public lobby, go into their secure lobby, and then down, excuse me, to that basement bike parking through the service elevator. The tenant is very focused on security for that bike parking. They want to secure it themselves. They want to operate the security of it themselves, so it won't be something that we as the landlord would perform that function. So it wants to be within their space and within their control, and they want, people to have to access it in a certain way. So that's part of all of the thinking that goes into this. We are studying with them another alternative of how we could get into that space, which we're going to show you on the second slide here. So this kind of merges the future location of the bike parking with what is their current location and access today, which is they park their bikes in the green garage today. They have a cage in there, and they park in the green garage. So if you're coming in as a bike commuter, a worker for Google, you come into the green garage, you go up slightly through the ramp, and then you access what is the secure, controlled bike cage operated by Google. We're proposing that we might do something that's a little bit the inverse of that, where instead of going up, they would still come in the green garage, they would go slightly down, and then immediately across the garage, there's a small nest there for the hotel. They could cross through the nest, and then we would punch through, because obviously there's an area where the garage and the new building basement, let me say be clear, because there's elevational differences here, where the lower level of the garage and the new building basement are almost contiguous. There's a little bit of a height difference. So, I don't have Tony. Can I borrow your pointer, Tony? So they could come in, go slightly down the little bit of a ramp there, cross through here, and then we could punch an opening through here, what is the existing wall of the garage, and then create like a runnel stair, which is a stair that you walk down with your bike at the side. And this has to be accessible as well, so it has to be compliant for people with disabilities. So there would be either a lift or potentially a long accessibility ramp, which would eat up some of the space. So that's one of the things we're working on with them. But that would basically preserve the way that they access the bike parking today through the green garage. They could come in here. It may be a little bit easier than going through their secure lobby and kind of going, through the turnstiles, and then they would go up into the building. So that's the thought, but it's not fully baked yet. This is the direction we're going.
Okay. Any further questions about the bike parking? Oh, I'm sorry.
Just a question about the utilization of parking in the green garage. Is that usually full on a daily basis during working hours? Or I know that BP has been sort of looking at district management of all of their garages.
You're talking about vehicular parking.
Vehicular parking, yes.
So it goes up and down, obviously, throughout the seasons, throughout the time of day. VHB, if you remember when we went through the master plan portion and had the IDCP approval, we presented the parking analysis across all of the district. It is relatively fully utilized. I would say one of the things that was identified in that is there's a very small window of time in the peak of the peak of the peak where we actually kind of don't have enough spaces, and that's one of the reasons that we made the commitment to create a district-wide notification system, so that if somebody is used to parking in the green garage and they pull up and there are no spaces, that they're notified by that outside, and it will say, okay, there might be no more spaces here, but you can go here or here. So it is very well utilized. I think, with this proposal, when we made the amendment, we did reduce overall the number of new parking spaces that are getting built with the IDCP amendment, or sorry, with this new square footage in phase 1, 2, and 3. And that is because globally, we are seeing the trends, going down. So we're really trying to walk that line of like building enough to satisfy existing and projected future demand without building too much.
If I could just follow up, I was looking at the IDCP permit, which does require short-term bicycle racks near each building primary entrance for visitors, customers, and couriers. Are those shown on the plans anywhere?
They are. They're not on this diagram. They are in the plans in the book. So the bike parking that I was just talking about here is not that short-term parking. That's the long-term bike parking.
I understand that.
So we distributed, and I don't know the page, and maybe if, Brian, you have a plan that you could pull up and we could show the folks on the presentation. The way that we've approached that, since there are multiple entrances to this building and there are multiple users, being both the commercial office tenant but also the future retail tenants, we've located the bike parking around. So there's some bike parking. Oh, great. Here you see the purple bike parking. There's some here along Main Street. There will be some back here at this entrance as well, because this is effectively an entrance to the building, and some people will be coming this direction from Ames Street. And then there's some located along here in front of the Marriott on the plaza, because there may be people accessing it from this direction as well.
Great, thank you.
Would one of the CRA board members like to make a motion?
Madam Chair, fully recognizing the progress and good work that's been made, I think for the purposes and of the CRA, I think the appropriate step for us tonight is not to vote approval, but to refer to our design review committee in order to maximize the sort of progress and the very good progress that I think the sense of the board has that we've made today. So I make that motion.
All in favor? All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Yes.
Unanimous.
Okay. So, planning board members, let me pull up the memo. If you want to adjourn your meeting, yes.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn? For CRA?
So moved.
All in favor?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We welcome you to stay through the rest of our procedure on this and also on the subsequent matter we have to take up. But if your preference is to leave, we fully understand, given the lateness of the hour.
Thank you very much.
So, Jeff, what do we need to do? Do we need to go through all of the various guidelines and make findings with regard to them, or just a general vote
Mr. Chair, no, there's no findings or like a special permit. It's approving the design as it's been presented. I would make reference to the design submission that was previously submitted to the board as supplemented by the additional graphic materials that were presented today. It would be subject to continuing review by staff. That's also laid out already in the special permit decision. I'm looking over to see if there's any particular, certainly when the process of continuing staff review, we'll be taking the comments of the board members into consideration as the project gets more refined. I'm just looking to make sure there isn't anything that's still left ambiguous that maybe we need to ask about.
We would just add in some continuing review items, which we usually have in our memos. And that would be just revised plans and elevations, so we have a consistent set. Also, review of the first and second floor tenant interior fit-outs, just so we can look at the sort of furnishings and where glazing is to keep that sort of transparency maintained. Review of all exterior materials, colours and details, and that would include the mock-up on site. And review of potential opportunities to improve the projected building and energy performance through envelope design or other measures. And review of all proposed public realm, open space, streetscape and landscaping details. And that would include the reconstruction of the Main Street sidewalk, which needs to be reviewed by Traffic and Parking and DPW.
Okay. So I guess could I have a motion to approve the design review for 325 Main Street in accordance with the materials that were previously received by the planning board as they've been updated through today, subject to continuing design review by the joint design review group between the planning board and the CRA, and subject to ongoing review by CDD, particularly with regard to the issues that have just been delineated by Susanna.
So move, but I'd also like to add a condition, which is that the presentation that was given to us today be furnished in hard copy for the members of the board who wish to keep a record of what we saw today, and the electronic version for those who do that.
Second.
And then all those in favor of the motion as presented? There are 5 members, so it is approved. Thank you, and good luck.
Can I just ask a question about, we understand the ongoing design review. Is the expectation that representatives from each board will continue to need joint design review?
That's my understanding. I think they
I think we as the representatives are willing to do that.
Okay, great. I
And
didn't want to be left with the condition that maybe people didn't have the time to do it. So it's worked great. So we just want to.
And hopefully CRA will include the same condition in their vote.
Right. Well, they're going to be doing design.
They're going to be doing the design review. So yes, our board representatives are fully prepared to continue doing this.
Yeah, I think they're greatly benefited by the wisdom.
Yeah.
So glad they're receptive to.
Well, great. So good luck to you all. Thank you. And we will take a 5-minute break, and then we have one BZA matter to attend to. And Mr. Rafferty, are you staying for that?
Oh, yeah. I thought you didn't do that.
We did not, no.
Meek.
Okay. We'll. Matter pending before the BZA with regard to Eversource seeking to change a facility at 45 Brookford Street. And I don't know, Swati, do you want to go into some details of the application?
Thank you, Chair. So the case is a BCA case, special permit for replacing the existing structure containing a gas regulator station within a new structure and to add a second curb cut on the lot. So we basically wanted to know if the board had any comments that need to be conveyed to BCA with regard to the review of this case. If you need material, oh, yes, and sorry, Jim is here too.
Yeah, I just want to say that the applicant, we had a second meeting with the neighborhood association last night, and they're not going to seek the second curb cut. He was concerned that the curb cut represented a loss of a parking space. So, so it's a special permit for the use of the gas transfer station and the curb cut, which requires a special permit because it's more than two within 100 feet. They're withdrawing that portion of the application.
All right, so we have received a email. Michael Brandon. We've seen board members.
I think it represents an improvement over the present building and the present fence. And I just think it's going to be there for another few decades probably, and it's not good enough. And it's basically a decoration and a fencing problem.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think if they've got to have these enclosures of this scale to do this function, I don't think we can question it. Obviously, Michael Brandon questions it, whether it's actually safe to do this task at this location, but I don't think we have any expertise about that. I just think it needs to look prettier. That's a technical architectural term.
Jim, in last night's meeting, were any other issues resolved that the neighborhood brought up?
What the evolution process was. So one of the big changes is the new building is going to be set back to conform to the setback requirements, which the current building does. So it created a front setback, but the plan was showing the fence right at the sidewalk edge, like it currently is. And after them the first time, they said, well, but that's very imposing. It looks like a prison. Why do you have to have one issue, candidly, that unresolved last night about the wall. Eversource is going to continue to some combination of safety and current standards around non-attenuation benefit to the wall and a but that about it's fine with the wall along the backside, but she really wishes to using the wall in that location. So Larry suggested we put cupolas on top of these projecting items. So, his idea shutters. Wants a few more shutters so they I mean, there was a lot of conversation about the use and the appropriateness. It is a use permitted by special permit. It is a gas transfer station. Gas comes in on a much bigger line. The Algonquin pipeline comes in there, and from there it gets stepped down and then gets distributed. So this is a long overdue safety improvement, which will, this activity is going to be occurring in a temporary location in Arlington for about the 6 months it will take to repipe and build this thing, and then it will end here and structure with its new building new infrastructure will be quieter, safer, and I would say they appear very receptive to time changes. So if there are specific anything so far, there was a debate last night whether stucco was preferable to brick. They're highly indifferent. I'm sorry about what? Tree? Yes. They said they would look at a street tree, but trees are problematic for the question about trees, and there are some trees at the end of the street that's actually in the public way. They offered to put a curving in there and not just on the sidewalk, but the way the street did. And you might recall when the board was reviewing the housing, which you can see in the back here, we had offered a pedestrian portal to get through, as it does in a couple of other locations, to get to the linear park. People, and they didn't want anyone coming down their street and coming through their property. So.
The island on the street side, is that what you're talking about, the trees where the vehicles parked?
Yeah, we think there's room for a street tree
Right.
Right where that car is parked.
Right.
Yeah.
Would a shorter wall do on that corner? You know, a 4 or 5 foot with a fence on top, you know?
That seemed like a compromise. I mean, I asked the same question. Well, what about height? I mean, it's on the fence side. I asked them. There could be some visual benefits to not seeing this typing, but sunlight in the garden. I know Eversource rep was going to go out there again today. They've been in the yard as well. She's been really terrific about it for years. Her husband plows the place. If there's a problem, she calls. She should practically be on the payroll because they live in super problem. And she said, look, if there's a problem, I call them and they come down. If she hears a noise that doesn't sound right, she'll call them. So they're trying to do what they can to accommodate her. So I'm optimistic that that's fine.
Yeah, I think, my only suggestion would be to try to put a little bit more green in there, if you can, in the front yard. I know you have to have the two driveways. Can you drive, no, you don't drive between the buildings, do you? Just on either side, right?
They were totally amenable to it. Apparently they have it on Healy Street, and they have it at Danby Park. They would not have, the synthetic grass they would do. They candidly said, look at.
They won't maintain it.
Things in there that will die. We don't have a crew that goes out and is going to cut a little patch of grass like that.
Oh, got it.
But that's some type of a pattern hardscape. They said, well, we synthetic grass if that was preferred.
Yeah, I don't know what is preferred.
It seems like there's reasonable dialogue happening between the residents of Brookford Street and Eversource, and you're probably facilitating that conversation. And that, yeah, it should go on, and that's how it should probably be resolved.
So does this board want to take any further action or make any statement with this, other than it could be prettier? Or just leave it to the abutters and at the zoning board? We can leave it to the zoning board? Okay. All right, fine. Thank you very much. I think that's all we have before us, and we are adjourned.